Hi everyone, welcome back. Last week we discussed what makes a bad test, and as we were discussing it, we were wondering, we are aware of all these things that make tests bad, but why then do we write tests that are bad? Because we have to be honest here, we write these just as much as any other developer. So, yeah.
I think I will start with the first one, which is obvious on the surface. Test code usually gets less attention. There are many reasons for that. Is that even if we say, okay, it's a first class code, we'll probably have less time for it. It's not necessarily will be first class architecture. Not necessarily we will be thinking much about the test code when we're estimating a story, planning our roadmap, and then of course naturally it will be going outside of the estimate of our time that we expected. Then we will try to cut corners and try to fix it later, but later might not come very soon.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because where it's actually in the planning phase that some of the seeds of these bad tests are sown. Especially if you haven't taken the time to build proper test infrastructure yet, then it's gonna be taking you a lot longer to build tests. So if you don't realize that while estimating stories, then that's gonna bite you, and that's also gonna give this negative feedback loop of, oh, my tests are slowing me down because this is what you haven't planned for.
Yes, we are often, not always, but often underappreciating the effort that we will need for tests, and those things are often tend to be left over. I think it's also a little bit not only about the tests, it's a little bit of a tale of different things that we treat with different priorities. So we have some focus on the architecture, maybe on the functional priorities, and then we have things around it that we consider, okay, they are important but not as important, and then we can be sacrificing effort, some time, and putting things for later when we have more time, which is rarely coming. And the test code is one of those things, which is even further probably away. So that's, I think, one of the natural tendencies. It's difficult to have a good discipline about always finishing the tasks on the test, or at least following it up on them, not putting the piles and piles of things to be fixed later, some other later, which will probably never come.
Yeah. So what are other examples of these kind of things that we don't prioritize enough? I guess documentation is a clear one.
It can be a documentation, it can be an operational use and operational concerns often, especially with the teams or processes where teams don't run their services themselves. But even when teams do run the services themselves, as in bold.com, sometimes you can see that it can be like, okay, yeah, we need to do, we don't see clearly what's happening, but it's not that important. Let's go build new features.
Until it breaks, and then suddenly it's really important.
Sometimes it's good when it breaks. I think it can be even more damaging when it doesn't really break to the point where it becomes obvious to the broader organization what's happened, and you have a huge long tail of the effort that you need to spend all the time a little bit. No, your business operations, other people, your consumers of your data, because you know that, okay, it's not perfect here. But that's a digression, I think.
Yes.
Let's go back back
basically
to
the argument for fail fast, I guess.
It's an argument for fail fast and keep less broken windows
Yes.
around, because it's often that, in my experience, I don't know how it happens, but it's like whenever I see something that we say, yeah, we know that there is an issue, somehow most of the time there will be hiding much more bigger issue behind it when you start to go and fix it.
Basically, we're saying bad planning causes us to write bad tests.
We are making bad planning because we're not giving it enough thought, I think, because it's a little bit of the cascade of bad planning. So we can say, okay, say we have perfect situation at the beginning of our effort in the technical thing, then probably it's on us that we are not giving enough priorities. But what often also often happens is that the technical implementation, technical planning even, starts far beyond the business prioritization, business planning, depending on the organization. But at bol.com, in some areas, we did have this, that the planning starts even before the technical people get involved. The expectations about the when something should be delivered, what are the priorities, what are the deadlines, and then even the core things can already be in jeopardy here, not even mentioning the testing, especially if the team is not strongly disciplined with getting value from testing and building the system in TDD manner. Because technically, if you're building in TDD, then you're putting your test before your code. So that's organically the part of your delivery.
Yeah. Which I think is a good idea to do. But coming back to what you were saying, that the planning process starts far before technical people are involved, then you're certainly not being agile, right?
Yes, that's a sign that you might not be agile, but that can be exaggerating those things. And yeah, well, let's be honest, not every organization, even organization like bol.com, which is generally speaking, I think, relatively agile, not every piece of it will be always naturally agile. There are often tendencies to assume that things will be just going by a simple plan.
No, yeah,
somewhere.
exactly. Yeah.
And until the things really hit it hard, as we were talking, like, and blow up, when people do learn on the leading positions, on the steps before that it's not, you cannot just wishfully think that the deadline will be met if the technical team says it won't.
No, yeah, exactly. But saying it won't as a technical team is a big ask.
Yeah, sometimes it's difficult because it's also like depends what do you mean it won't. There are things technical and not technical. You can say, yeah, you can always hack something that something will kind of work, but what will be the risk that the something will be leaked or not working properly, or what will be the consequences for further refactors? But here we're digressing.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Yeah, so
tricky thing with the tests also is that they are not trivial, and also that you are getting quite a slow feedback when the things are going not well there. So when you're starting with a green field service, you are not getting much feedback about the architecture, but even less about the test, because you can test, write them as you wish. Slowness, you will probably not see it. Unlikely that you will have much flakiness. And those problems, they will be accumulating relatively slowly. Well, it depends on your pace. Thinking also about architecture, if you're not thinking a bit about it up front, or maybe you did choose a wrong, not the best fit for your particular case, or it's changing, the architecture can also be diverging. But the test will be even slower. So you will get this very much delayed feedback when the things are getting sour, unless you're paying a lot of attention to that, unless you've been beaten many times before. And that means that makes it very difficult to keep it healthy and also to fix later, because suddenly when you do start to get the issues, you realize, oh, look, my build is taking already 40 minutes. We were not paying attention. It was incrementing all the time a little bit. But now to fix it, I need to redo my tests. Or I just don't know how to fix it. Or maybe I should stop writing integration tests because they're so slow and making my builds slow.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a funny mechanism, because like in their nature, tests are intended to speed up the feedback mechanism about your production code. But it's indeed a really keen observation that low quality in your test, that actually has a really slow feedback loop. Yeah, I've never considered that angle, but that's also one of the reasons why it can be hard to explain to maybe people who have not been bitten by bad tests so often why it's so important.
Yes, that's a very good point from you, because depending on your scale and trajectory, you might not even hit this really sour a bad situation, especially if you're working with microservices. If you have a well-defined, very really small microservice, then you can really keep it small and tidy. But the effect of the badness of the test, they will grow at some point very quickly. So it becomes often difficult to estimate when we're reaching. So you don't want to invest huge amounts of time and thinking about the architecture maybe here, especially if you have team with different backgrounds, not with the same background and the way you can reuse the blueprint. But you need to know the point where it's not too late to becoming difficult a little bit early and convince the team that it is worth investing and maybe making your life a little bit more difficult when you're writing tests, because we're approaching that point when we will be beaten. It will stop to scale.
Yeah, and I think there is one of the key artful points of getting test strategy right, is because we're also touching here on is it a bad thing that your tests are bad? And that is entirely dependent on how complex your system as a whole will be somewhere in the future.
Or for people who will be new to you, maybe there will be not many new people. Maybe you will continue with the same team, and some things that they will be just sitting in your head, and then you will say, okay, it's done, and it will be working happily ever after.
Yeah, and maybe
most probably not.
You've done all the innovation that's necessary for this particular microservice, and it'll run happily for 3 years, and then the entire value chain will get invalidated. So that is entirely possible.
Yes, absolutely. That's the tricky part, and sometimes you can start. Okay, I will not go into starting without tests. That's blasphemy. Don't record me. I don't want to be saying this on camera.
Well, I think for experimentation, that's actually really, really valid. But
yeah, for experimentation depends on what kind of for tooling, for site things. Yes,
and what kind of mechanism you have in place to fix that problem. As in, you need to concretely say that this is an experiment, and as soon as you move to a phase where this is gonna live longer, you need to build that quality in. Right. So we've discussed how bad planning can be a critical factor in why we write bad tests, and we discussed how badness of tests is something that has a really slow feedback loop, and what that means for what if you even never hit that feedback, that negative feedback. So I think that's two really interesting parts of why we write bad tests, and next week we'll continue this analysis. Thanks.
Awesome.
I'll see you then. All right.